thank you, Joe, by the way, for the non-scientific version of it. As I don't think we have any real data to share with, more just observations, stories, and the stuff we see on a day-to-day basis. But as Jason and I were talking about, okay, what are we going to do to talk at the wild world of weeds on this? And we both were like, okay, I think we'll call this the top 5. And so maybe you guys know, maybe you don't. Jason's up in Devil's Lake. I'm in Dickinson. So we get a little coast to coast, look at what we do. Cropping systems are similar, but at the same time, very different. So where I'm dominantly no-till, a lot drier, you're dominantly conventional tillage.
Yep. Got a few no-till people, but I'm mostly reduced till.
But as you'll see, if we're looking at our top 5 weeds, and not in any particular order, because we're not going to give you a rank and say this is the worst thing I deal with or this is the least worst thing. But if you look to that list, we have similarities and we have differences. So you'll see that wild oats hit the top of our, told you there's no particular order to this, but wild oats are on that list. Koch is on that list as overlap, and then everything else is different as far as what we consider our top 5 from 2025. So we'll just dive right in.
I'm gonna move over here so I can see a little bit better. That's okay.
Nope, that's perfect.
So a lot of this is going to pertain to everything I feel that you've seen today or heard today, or took any screenshots or any of that type of stuff. So I'll just give you my perspective from a wild oats standpoint. Almost all my wild oats are group 1 or group 2 and both resistant. Okay. That's the predominant thing. And that is, so we have a tough time in particularly edible beans and field peas. We still do a lot of clethodim in particular with Liberty Link canola, but we are running into situations where it's just become a thing. Now, the advent in my area, particularly of Roundup Ready crops, so corn and soybean, have really brought the populations down. These 2 pictures on the top, this is what I run into when I'm scouting. I don't have fields that are huge populations. I have small pockets that sometimes are tough to run into and find unless I've got them marked, but they are almost all resistant oat. And one of the questions as consultants in our area, we're asking ourselves, do we even spray wild oats going forward, post-emerge with any group 1 or group 2 chemistry?
That's a great point, unless you're gaining some kind of broadleaf activity out of those things. But I can mirror the same thing to what Jason's saying. It's everything he said, we're dealing the same way, and it really seems to change by farm depending on the rotation schedule. So where I have these wild oats issues, they're with particular farms, they're field specific, and they're rotation specific. So for us, if it's a small grains and pulse crop rotation, which if the farm is in a small grains pulse crop rotation and that's all they're growing, they're usually doing 2 years of small grains, 1 year of pulse crop, and repeat. 2 years of small grain, 1 year of pulse crop, repeat. So essentially, and even though like the one producer of mine, it's a rotation, even in the small grains, because it's durum and wheat, both in that rotation, but it's not really a rotation. You're using the same exact chemistries. You're not doing anything different, and you're subjecting that population of wild oats basically to the same herbicides at the same time every single season. It's an early crop, and it's the same applications over and over and over.
My worst rotations are farms that contain, they're very much into edible beans, and they have a lot of barley. And my best, where I don't have as big of problems, is where I have more corn, particularly corn and soybean. So my top 3 crops are wheat, soybean, canola, and soybean and canola will flip-flop depending on the year. So that's something. How we're managing around this, One of the things we're trying to do is this goes back to some of the slides. We're definitely seeing more Fargo used. We're doing that, and fall Zidua for my no-till guys. That in there. We try to get a spring burn down as much as we can, but glyphosate in the spring, when it's those patches, they're spears, maybe 50-60% control is all you can guarantee on that. So it helps, but it's not a cure-all all the time.
50-60 with Roundup, or
yeah, in the spring, because they're just little spears that are sticking up. So it's a coverage thing, and because those patches are so thick that you just don't get the coverage on there. So it looks good for about a week, and then you come back and like, oh, there's still a lot of wild oats there. Now, when I said wheat and soybeans and canola are my top crops, one of the changes I might make this year on one particular farm is I will go to a Roundup Liberty combination canola, because it's going to be easier to manage the volunteer canola than it is the wild oats. I need, other than going 3 years of beans on beans, which I don't necessarily want to do, and this farmer won't put corn in. So,
And just one thing on my end, on an observational standpoint, like I said, I have one farm for sure that's 2 years small grain, 1 year pulse crop, and I have another farm that only introduces one crop extra on top of that rotation, and they grow corn as well, and so they have small grains, corn, and pulse crops, and they've been doing that just as long as the other farm, and they have almost virtual no wild oats they deal with on population wise, but they have neighboring farms that are still back on that heavy small grain rotation with no corn and all early season crop, and have the same wild oat issues. So it's not like this one farm just is in a pocket that doesn't have wild oats. It's definitely a by farm by field on how you rotate crops, how you're managing herbicides, and the corn thing, big play in it is that you're applying glyphosate, which is giving you excellent control of wild oats, but it's also the timing that you're applying the glyphosate. Because back to the spring thing, like I often wonder with these repeated early passes, no matter what, because the crop's in, you got to get some kind of burn down in. You're subjecting all the selection pressure. So what are the chances that everything is having later emergence because we're selecting for it, including wild oats?
So the one grass product that we still rely on a lot is clethodim. In the case of peas and flax and edible beans in particular in my area, it has to be sprayed by itself. As soon as that is tank mixed with Varisto or Basagran, you would just antagonize the heck out of it, and you drop off right away. So that is, and we're running straight clethodim and MSO, and that seems to help. But to tell somebody they got to spray that in one pass versus two, guess what happens? The rate goes up, and it's a one pass, and you still have antagonism at very high rates of clethodim. So I'm sure Brian Jenks is going to have the list when it gets bigger, because we are not doing the stewardship we need to do with that grass product.
Yeah, and the only other add-in I got is it comes back to just having different crops in rotation. So, I have other farms that have just small grains and sunflowers in a rotation too, but we don't have the wild oats issues. And the only thing I can contribute that to is that our clethodim is being applied at a totally different time when the wild oats are fully emerged and we're able to get control. So I think, again, it's just having a different crop with a different timing, and you're able to show that weed population a similar mode of action, but at a completely different time.
And I'm in central Ramsey County. It's worse in northern Ramsey County. As you go north into Towner, Cavalier, and then all the border counties along the state, that's the worst group 1, group 2 resistance you'll run across in the state. So good luck, right?
And I'll mirror what Jason said, fall pyroxasulfone, so that your Zidua Anthem has been absolutely awesome in that utility. Now, at the 4 ounce rate. Yeah, it's lighter than that. I have seen very inconsistent results, but at 4 ounces works absolutely awesome.
And it's my Zidua or Anthem Flexes look really good in the fall when rain is not an issue and it's no-till. Then it looks really good. Yes,
Jason, is Liberty effective in soybean?
Liberty effective in soybean for wild oat. Once you get a tiller out on that, it's really tough. So almost all of the Liberty, if it's particular with canola, gets clethodim in it. And the challenge I always remind my growers, a clethodim rate in edible beans and sunflowers is different than canola, and there is a timing thing that you absolutely have to pay attention to on that. Trust me. Next one. Okay, this is one of mine. We were wet in the spring of 22, we were wet in 24, we were wet in the fall of 25. Foxtail barley has just been taken off, and as you decrease tillage and go to more Salfords and Pro-Tills and things like that, this weed for me has really gotten shown its presence. So it is, I get a lot of calls on it because it's a very tough grass to kill in the spring. I honestly believe this is a fall application, and even when you don't think you have a lot of it out there, the benefit of time in the fall is something you got to pay attention to. Spring is tough because it's growing. When that foxtail barley is in a small stage, it has a very narrow leaf. So until it gets a bunch out there, that's when you pay attention to it. I think all crops that are not Roundup ready should have a fall application in the fall, particularly barley and wheat for this weed. And the rate that I use is I think you have to be there. It's a 30-ounce Power Max 3 equivalent. This is a tougher grass to control. I don't use in the spring clethodim or quizalofop. Sure too. It's a glyphosate. It does a very good job. I put this one picture in here. You can see the tillage pass. That's mostly what I have if you miss it. And if that's in wheat, I have fields this year that I had really bad foxtail barley because the wind kept us out and the wheat got up before we could do a burn down. And there you are. Jeff.
So Jason, in your opinion, what's the earliest and the latest you can spray for this weed with glyphosate in the fall?
In the fall, I think that if you can go out as late in the fall as possible, if you've got the sprayer inside and it's that cold outside, I have sprayed quack grass with glyphosate when you have to chip the ice out of the water tank cold, and it works because you've got you just got to get it on. It will translocate. The early time is the tricky part because you got to have leaf material. And the first true leaves that come out of this are very spindly and thin. So you got to get something. The problem is that this is during harvest. And so it gets left alone. These are all in the saline areas and the sodic areas and places where crop doesn't grow. And then it just seeds out and goes all over the place.
So in our prior lives, careers or whatever, as tech agronomists, I remember there's actually both him and I, we were in Minnewacan. Remember what I'm talking about there?
Yeah.
So not foxtail barley, but I would say like a kind of a related cousin as far as how you're managing and how you work with it is Downy Brome. And we were actually putting out what we were just doing as a fall residual trial. And I can't remember if that was after deer hunting season or right before it. But it was really windy that day, and we basically had to hang out until right before dark. We had a farmer cooperator that goes, yep, this is like where our worst patches of kochia was mainly what we were laying down residual for. And so it showed us exactly where we needed to go. That ground was bare. I did not see any grass. I didn't see any kochia. We still included glyphosate in every base treatment. And then we were just looking at various things like Valor and Metribuzin and
2,4-D dicamba.
2,4-D dicamba. And so we had all these glyphosate combinations in the base with all of those other items. And those were all applied. And then within, let's say, 4 hours, it started snowing that evening after we finished. The next morning we woke up and there was maybe 10 inches of snow. The next spring we come back and every fall residual treatment looked pretty good on the kochia, but there wasn't a lot of kochia in that spot. But what was there was a lot of Downy Brome. And every pass that had the glyphosate tank mix in it, there was no Downy Brome. Where the passes in between the hand boom passes, and then the one untreated check were carpets, the
Yep.
downy brome. So to Jeff's question to Jason, it's like as late as you can possibly go with glyphosate, you're going to get some kind of activity.
I'm standing 6 feet from the ground and there's nothing on the ground, and we sprayed and we come back in the spring and we had a 10-foot boom and we put a 2-foot gap between that. We put a 2-foot gap between that and it's green strips all the way down. And I'm standing like looking at this. I'm like, there's nothing here. Why we got glyphosate mixed in? But it was already pre-mixed. So
The harvest and that people think about going, I'm gonna go September, and I say, no, wait, as long as you possibly can. And I just wanted to get your opinion
On which species?
on foxtail barley or the downy brome, and any of the winter annual.
I think we have a counterpoint here.
I'm gonna disagree on the foxtail barley, not as late as you can. Because foxtail barley tends to shut down a little earlier. And where I sprayed the last week of September, anytime I spray the last week of September, it's almost clean the next spring. The other thing that foxtail barley and Roundup don't like is cold temperatures. Where in the spring, where I spray in warm temperatures, I get almost 100% foxtail barley control. But if it's cold, 55, 60, 60% control. It's got to be warm in the spring.
I love it. We're getting all this extra add in here. This is exactly the style we like to talk. So please, guys, keep coming up. Okay, one that's on my list that's not necessarily on Jason's is green and yellow foxtail, and I'll probably pick more on green foxtail than yellow just because I have way more green populations than I have yellow. And there's a couple reasons I think that keep leading up to why that more predominantly is getting to be more and more of a weed of concern or more management on my end. And like Brian was bringing up earlier in his presentation when he was showing, look at the weeds that Zidua was controlling well, and then the ones that were only partial, and then he had foxtails on that partial, and then he was bringing up that those are more late emerger type weeds. At least in my local populations, I see green foxtail coming up earlier every year. And I sit a little frustrated because I used a lot of Tolvera this last year solo, and I was not near as happy with my green foxtail control on those solo or relying on the Tolvera for the green foxtail control part of it. But I also know part of that was because of the size of the green foxtail that was there. And part of that is because we're getting in this like weird area where it doesn't emerge soon enough to be caught in a glyphosate burn down, but it emerges shortly after and gains size at the same time as the wheat. And so this puts us in a weird spot on how we control that. And so, it gets me in a conflicted position where, I see that there's potentially some antagonism issues with other herbicides and Tolvera on the green foxtail part of it. And knowing what the right or wrong thing is to do there. But it's definitely become more of a management issue. But now in Western North Dakota too, I think one of those things that's really contributing to this as well, that those of us local probably are seeing it, is that these patches seem to be more like spatially related. So they happen in like geographic areas. And where we have soil acidity issues, we have aluminum toxicity, and where that's happening, we get reduced stands on all crops. And it doesn't matter how good of a job you do on your herbicide program, if you don't have a canopy to shade the ground out, something is going to come in that place. And this just happens to be one of those grass species that still is tolerant to those lower pH soils, more so than like some of the small grains or pulse crops. And then they fill in those areas, and then they become a point source of some of those weeds. They make it to maturity, they're setting out heads, and then those areas begin to spread. So I think probably our biggest hurdle going forward is the more and more we go forward and the more we have this stratified pH and we're starting to see these acidity areas grow, I think this will keep being a dominant weed we have to deal with. And I think our biggest part of controlling that will be if we can manage our pH on a fertility level. I think we'll start to gain the crop canopy back in those areas, and we'll get control of that weed. Hey, there's me again. Okay, so here's another fun one. So stink grass. We actually, so this comes up every single year, every single season. And it's always at harvest. Everyone's like, wow, these spots, they're full of stink grass and there's no wheat. It has to be the stink grass that caused the issue. That's why we have no yield in those areas. And I can tell you from doing, 95% of my soil sampling is zone-based, that I can go right to the zone where the stink grass happens. And guess where it always happens? Eroded hilltops that are light in organic matter, and especially the lighter texture soils always have stink grass in them. So part of that could be soil acidity, but the other dominant thing I see is, well, one, you don't have water. So you don't produce a crop canopy over those areas. And what I'm noticing more and more, where the very, very worst of it is I see really low potassium levels. And so is it the water first that yield limited and wheat didn't stool out enough and shade out the ground? Or, was it already short on potassium to some level and then wasn't able to grow prolifically enough and stool out and shade out the ground? There's a good question there. But another thing that I think we start paying attention to fertility, you probably notice a lot of those areas are very coarse in soil texture. I'm noticing they're very low in K, and that's almost dominantly where I always find them. And so will addressing the fertility in those areas make a difference? For what wheat's worth right now, I don't know if adding extra K in a variable rate sense makes much sense either, but they're always showing up in those areas, and they emerge way after the fact from any in-season application, but they're almost always in what I call those red zones in my soil sampling fields.
Here's a weed you don't have to worry about anything fertility-wise because it's everywhere, okay? Is Adam Spellhog in here? Right? His saying is once a canola grower, always a canola grower, right? And that is true. I wanted this first slide just to show that's a wheel track. So it just kind of gives you the scope of the intensity. The second picture is when you have a short rotation, and that is volunteer Liberty canola volunteers in your Liberty canola field, and you miss your burn down. And the third one over there is what happens when the sprayer primes out, and that's your metribuzin that you've got in with your pre-emerge, okay? My issue with this weed is that I'm seeing much, much more cross-pollinated Roundup Ready Liberty Link. And if you move into Cavalier County, add Clearfield to that as well. Okay, so now you got a three-way canola plant that you have to deal with. So it's changing up some of our burn downs. There's going to be more affinity broad spec or a Panaflex or 2,4-D in with your glyphosate to take care of this. Because now I got enough of this now in my beans that's showing up that I'm just making the assumption that almost all my canola volunteer out there is cross-pollinated because of the way it shows up.
Like everybody else, when that's lost your glyphosate and extend and crops control with the canola.
Yep. So this is an added cost situation, is what this ends up being, right? So it was great to hear from our main speaker today on that, because I use atrazine in all my corn and use metribuzin on all my soybeans and peas, just to combat this weed. So I get the extra benefits of lamb's quarter, pigweed, and kochia, but I'm mostly after that one right there. And probably this will change if it gets to be that way. Most of my beans are Extend Flex. They will probably gravitate more toward an Enlist system just because of the 2,4-D aspect.
And then now with canola varieties too, we're seeing a lot more cross-tolerant options. So it's not even just cross pollination from say like one Liberty field to one Roundup field. But now you have the stacks.
It doesn't, you know what, if you're in soybeans and you got that and you're not sure, it doesn't take much Famecifin, Flexstar to wipe it out. 4 ounces and you just smoke that stuff, right? But it's an added cost type of thing. The killer, this weed is a killer if you've got a short rotation. That's the thing. The more you can spread your rotation out, the less it becomes a problem.
So back to like the wild oats comment. The more you can diversify your rotation, the more different looks you get, the more chances you worked on that population.
This is my top weed right now to deal with. You know, we're trying to crush kochia. These are pictures that I just, here's a triangle piece right there where one of my farmers went in with a pro-till. These 2 pictures here, that's just pile up windy days where kochia seed blew into an area when I was out soil sampling. And that's my soil probe right there, the 3rd slide, and that's what came up on a core in the spring, okay? So if you got a population like that already out there, you're gonna have troubles because it's already got such a head start on you. This weed could probably take, I don't know how long of a discussion, but it's just
the rest of the time.
Something, yeah, it probably gives me the most heartache. I do not feel at this point that I have group 14 issues, but I know if I would test and send in to Zach at the lab, I probably would find some, okay? So I am masking some of that because I'm using metribuzin on all my pre's. I personally think we should I want to find where that rate is. I think we could go higher rates even on what we're doing. All my corn gets an atrazine application. And I'm on team atrazine in with your pre because it's the smallest kochia that atrazine is going to see. Even if you're using, let's say an Armazon Pro and atrazine, you're just on bigger kochia. So I'm trying to preserve my atrazine, and after what I heard today, I got to double down on that, I think. So all my kochia I feel is group 2, group 9, and in some cases, group 4, dicamba resistant. Yes, I do put dicamba in with my pre, and this because it's the smallest kochia that I deal with the whole year is the stuff that hasn't emerged. And in the last 2 years, if it has emerged and you're doing your burn down pre before your beans are seeded or after, which is most of what I do is after, if that kochia is up over 2 inches, dicamba struggles tremendously. So one of the approaches is I've talked to my farmers and say, okay, if I'm running a sulfentrazone, metribuzin, AMS, MSO, and dicamba isn't doing what it's supposed to do, we're substituting in paraquat. And I get about 50% pushback on that. I just have guys that don't want to use it. I'm like, well, so now what we do is we're going to have to make sure that if we have any escapes, it all falls back on Liberty, unfortunately. I had some fields last year where I had some growers who still had Ingenia inventory, and it might have went out post-emerge. And I can tell you we definitely sprayed within a week because that stuff was anywhere from 8 to 12 inches tall. It did nothing, 0. And when we came back in, it was like that picture Brian had up there of when we had the heat and humidity. We nuked it with Liberty. I personally think dicamba is on the back end of its journey here, if it's in a post-emergent situation. On beans, it is different, I think, when you're in cereals in cooler weather.
I was going to say, this is where I'll give you the contrast on there, where I'll pick on the corn topic first. I love atrazine in my group 27s in corn on corn, but we're not spraying corn, let's call it 12 inches tall. We're out spraying corn 6 to 8 inches tall at the highest. And right after planting, or even before if we need to, we're relying real heavily on high rates of dicamba. So that's where we're coming into like the pint rates of dicamba. And then just as much glyphosate as we need. to take care of the job there. And that seems to hold everything at bay and small enough where we can come with atrazine and you pick your flavor of HPPD. And that activity just picks up so much more with having atrazine in it. I just don't dare put it in a pre-situation in our circumstance, but it works really good in our rotation that way. But outside of like the herbicide resistant stuff, I wonder if the kochia populations aren't being selected for in a way where different things are happening. Tom was talking earlier about delayed emergence, where you're seeing kochia coming up in July. One thing I'm noticing, like kochia is always up early. It's one of the first things that are up. But I've watched a lot of the kochia populations I look at stay in that small button stage. You know, these little dime size or smaller, very pubescent canola plants for weeks, not just for a little amount of time, but for weeks. You know, so it'll sit there for the whole month of May almost, and sit in that really, really small stage. And then all of a sudden, snap the finger, and it has grown like 6, 7 inches overnight. And all of a sudden it went from, we got time to, oh no, we're past our window. Yes, and it's bad.
Yep.
And when it's in that pubescent stage, if actually, so if anyone's got like a nicer phone camera, especially like the Pro Series iPhones, which is what I have, you can get up close to these things and get these excellent pictures just to see how hairy these little button kochia plants are. And then you start to really just visualize and look at that and go, how does a spray droplet even penetrate down to the leaf surface of those things? I don't think it matters how much surfactant or how much AMS or how much water you use. Sometimes you're just not going to penetrate to the leaf surface on those little tiny kochia plants. And so, like for us, I spend a lot of effort on, okay, let's wait as long as we possibly can to do our spring burn down. And so we're flirting on the line of logistics and, you know, small grains emerging before we actually go and spray. But if you're, how it's traditionally done, as soon as you're putting wheat in the ground, no matter what time, and last year was an absolutely wonderful example. We planted a lot of wheat into March, beginning of April, and we were, I'd say 45 days before we had any significant rain, and very dry and very, very slow growth. And that kochia just sat there like this, just sat there and did not move. And everyone just logistically, we got to get out there and spray right now. Well, we did a burn down at, and they're like, it didn't do anything. I don't know where this kosher's come from. And all of a sudden it's bad, you know, once you wait long enough in the season. So I wonder if we're not selecting for local populations that are slower growing in the early stages or delaying their emergence and becoming a weedy problem later. So I think that's probably one of the bigger things. And I think our biggest way to combat that, again, is for us in the West, is we got to introduce some kind of glyphosate tolerant crop or some crop that we're able to use a herbicide that's effective on kochia that's later in the season. So I shouldn't say glyphosate because we have a lot of resistance issues with that, but where you have tank mix options, and that's where corn has really come and played well, because we have a lot of good options that we can apply just late enough when this is actively growing and bigger, and we're able to control it.
Kochia control, paraquat, it's 60 degrees burned out. What have you seen in terms of consistency?
Not great.
Warmer the better.
Warmer and sunnier the better, for sure. But if that's the forecast I got, I'll take it versus letting it get height. And it's like trying to manage around, okay, we probably need to move this to, instead of 10 gallons, we probably, can you give me 15 to 20 and go that route. And then I will jack, I'll take paraquat, I'll move it to the highest rate. It automatically gets an non-annex surfactant, and then I'm putting MSO in. I'm giving it the sriracha. So, right, next one.
Jason, on your corn program, are you running the You're running 12 ounce of that shit, right?
Yep,
That's all you're doing.
that's all I'm doing.
Reverse with that camera running.
Yeah, or I'll.
Oh, you're running.
So this year I actually ran quite a bit of dicamba because we missed our, my plan was to go total pre. I was going to do verdict atrazine. That was the corn plan. The wind had other plans. So we ended up going in at spike corn with dicamba atrazine. And then I had some actually later, I did Armazon Pro atrazine on some other fields and decided to use MSO. It was the weather that year. I didn't have as much problems with that as I thought. I prefer to have my atrazine on when I got small I've had kochia come up after atrazine, and when the sunlight hits it, boom, it's done. Turns crispy brown. Now I wish I could use a half a pound or 3/4 of a pound, but all my acres get 3/8 of a pound. Anybody else? Questions, comments? I'm just throwing this up here. I've seen some things with group 28s that have me pretty nervous, particularly around pigweeds and kochia. And so I'm doing some things to manage that by reducing, in kochia you have to reduce the population and you have to reduce the size. And I will struggle with sharpen I struggled in 21 because it had low humidity and dry, and 23. But if I get rain on it, it's awesome. And I can come in with whatever I want to after that and clean things up. I just don't have an issue. Now, sharpen is not cheap. Okay, the two things it brings to me is canola and kochia control. And then this is just off a field I had here where this is just a size of kochia using Husky FX. A lot of our acres get a group 28 and group 6 product. 27, yeah. So I'm just trying to, I have certain fields. I took on 2 fields as a consultant. I can't bash kochia because it's actually very good monetary wise to get clients because of that weed, right? But managing around it is you just gotta be on top. You gotta be on small stuff. Okay, I'm a rookie at this. This is my water hemp journey. Started finding it. We've had a dry 21, really a non-issue. We flooded in the spring of 22, and then we dry 22, other than some rain in the end, and would find some. Okay, and then we were dry in 23, not a problem. 24 wet the whole year. Water hemp started showing up, 6, 10, 12 fields, something like that. This year, after September 10th, it rained constantly. And you ever seen those charts where it's like, you know, when you're making an investment and your interest just sits there, and all of a sudden it goes like this at the very end? That's where I'm at right now in water hemp. So your low areas, ditches, waterways, any place where there is a crop that there was no canopy, where you got a AB line screw up and there's a blank spot, you'll find water hemp there. So I picked a tremendous amount of water hemp this year. And this is an observation of mine. Okay, this is just my farmers. My farmers are so terrified of Palmer that they're looking this way when water hemp's coming this way, and they're not paying attention to it. This bottom picture is just a pre-harvest in a low area. And so I would document. It got to the point in September that it was easier to tell my farmers which fields don't have it than the ones that do have it. So it's really taken off. It's going to be something where I have a lot of guys who've never layered in herbicides. I have a lot of guys who haven't used any fall herbicides. They're going to have to get used to using some Zidua, that type of thing. You're going to have to, I honestly think the Enlist, the 2,4-D system's better than the Extend. I had some water hemp I sent to Joe Eichley. He tested it, and it was like 4x a rate dicamba tolerance. And this is the first time it got in. primarily in our area, it's ground that sits with water and it's waterfall. Ducks and geese, that's how it gets spread. We don't really have too many outside custom combiners. That's where it's at, and it's really ramped up. So I know many of you in here have been dealing with it a lot longer, that type of thing. I'd love to talk to you myself about what we're going to do. I have ideas what we have to do, but I just have to, the biggest thing for me is making my growers aware that what we've been doing for weed management in the past, this weed will change it. And that's just how it's going to be.
Question, have you dealt with it in wheat? And what did you do post-harvest after?
So one of the changes that'll probably happen, most of it, if it's in wheat, like these pictures, they're all in drowned out areas. That's primarily where I find it. This picture over here was a wheat, this third one, that was a wheat field. That's all pretty much the dead stuff is barnyard grass. So that's a slough that drowned it out, and they sprayed through pre-harvest glyphosate, and that's what's left out there. We will probably have to look at leaving stubble, letting stuff grow up, come in with a glyphosate 2,4-D dicamba or paraquat as an option to just get everything, try to burn down so it doesn't, I don't want anything go to seed even if it's small. So it's just a numbers game. And I had a patch that I walked out and I hauled 3 loads of this out with my hands around it as big as I could. And I don't know, it's probably 75 to 100 pounds. There's so much seed. I know I got seed sprinkled and taking it out, but I had to get it out of the field because it's so much of it. And that spot in the fall, when the beans came up, they had to combine around it because there was water sitting in there. It's like, well, why do you think we got water hemp in there? So
my concern for you going forward now is you're seeing it on the real early end. I mean, you saw it here a couple of years ago, and now it's getting worse and worse. But when you say I see it in a pothole, I see it in a drown out area, those are your point sources. That's where there wasn't a crop canopy. Now you have these adult plants that make it. I mean, you're doing everything you can to keep it out of the fields you look at. But how many fields are getting looked past? And what's the one thing everyone does in the pothole areas? As soon as they can get through those areas, they're going to work them up to dry them out, right? Or get it fit. And then you're spreading out of those potholes. And that's going to take seed into everything else. And I think it's going to turn into, like you said, it's going to change your guys' weed management game entirely.
Biggest thing I tell people is you see something that you don't see is right, do not run it through the combine. Don't put it through there. So, and then you get pictures and it's curly dock and biennial wormwood and marsh elder and whatever. But don't run it through. And I've had plenty of that. So I know my fields next year are probably going to be much higher, but that's the way it is.
It's something, fortunately, so far in the southwest part of the state, we don't hear about it or see it. So I don't know if it'll be because we'll see Palmer in the future instead of water hemp or what the deal is, but I'm sure our time will come. And so then just one last that I put in my top 5 is an honorable mention was mare's tail wasn't an issue for us this last year. 2 springs ago, it was a tremendous issue. I can tell you that this coming spring is going to be a tremendous issue for us, and it's all on the season. And so the difference being is this spring we started out really dry, and the fall before was very dry. And then same thing for the year before. So yeah, it was 2 years ago that we had really good populations of mare's tail come through. And it was because we were dealing with more of a wet fall and we germinated a lot of this winter annual. And I noticed it soil sampling this year. And if you're not paying attention and not looking, you wouldn't see it. And this was in a cornfield with a new client I'm working with, and I started scratching away some ground. And this is after deer hunting season, before it snowed. And I started seeing this out there. I'm like, oh, this is going to be fun. Because they were so busy with corn and sunflower harvest yet, there's going to be none of that got a fall residual. And so we're definitely going to be dealing with mare's tail. And then I've already thought in my head, I'm like, okay, where didn't we put fall residual? And where have we traditionally been dealing with mare's tail? So I I don't even have to bet on it. I know that we're going to be dealing with a lot of mare's tail this coming year, and it's going to be a management issue just because of how wet in the west our fall was.
So if you get a wet fall, you know that horseweed's coming. Get a 2,4-D or a dicamba down in the fall. It will significantly reduce this population.
Do you have any, so I'll back up. So you gave a kind of a timeline for foxtail barley like that. Do you think there's that same?
But this weed
Yep.
is more dependent on rainfall, when the rainfall comes. If you have a dry fall, you won't even see it the next spring. But if you get rain in say August and early September, you might see it as early as mid-September. So you just have to go out and start looking for those little seedlings when they merge it, because it could be mid-September, it could be mid-October when you spray. That's where if you spray fall Valor, then the Valor gives you residual. If you spray, say, a Valor and a 2,4-D, and thanks to Aaron Cronke for this data, a fall Valor mid-September will give you residual to control anything that comes up later. The 2,4-D will control what's emerged at the time.
Yeah, and that's gonna be the problem, because we talk about biology, weeds changing biology. This thing is not just a winter annual. So that 2,4-D Valor is a good idea, and if we didn't do it in the fall like you're talking, then we're gonna have that dicamba in there, or Metribuzin plus 2,4-D plus Paraquat is good in the burn down in that situation. I think so.
The other non-herbicide thing I talk to my guys a lot about, and it's really tough because it's harvest time, is fall rye going into soybeans or edible beans. I know we're going to have to get to that point because we got to have as much suppression as non-herbicide. Herbicide will probably be a part of that, but if I can get some extra help, it's really tough. And this year was so wet that we got ruts, and you would not drag an air seeder out to go do that, but it's something else that we got to consider.
Well, I'm going to point out 2 other consultants that I know utilize rye, like Lee Breeze and Darren Dunham. Completely different geographies they deal with, but they both do it, and they utilize fall rye in those situations. And yeah, I think it's one of those ones that's intermittent enough that if you have these dry years, you're like, well, I wouldn't want to do that anyways, or logistically you couldn't do it. And then, but that's something that would have paid dividends to put it out. But I would even go as far as saying, just putting it in a spreader and just going and blowing it on to just, even if they're alkali seeps or wet areas, potholes, whatever, I think that would be good areas to go do that kind of practice.
Click
We're in
it.
our 5-minute warning. 1 minute warning.
Click it.
Okay, we're going to speed right past this, and we've asked lots of questions, but we have to make a selfless or shameless plug.
If you got nothing to do in 2 weeks, you want to come up to Devil's Lake, and this is the type of conversations we have at Agronomy on Ice, right? These exact type scenarios, because there's just nothing that's totally defined, and there might be some food and there might be some beverage, and it's just that type of day. So you're all invited. There's no cost to come up to do that. And
show of hands, who has, well, I want to hear 2 different levels of this. Who's heard of it? Okay, so we've done a good job there. Who's actually gone? Okay, so Devil's Lake, couple weeks. It's tailgating and a trade show combined.
We got plenty of ice now, and we're going to put, by Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday this week, we're going to put on a lot of ice.
Plenty of ice. We got some great company participants that have been doing this for a lot of years. And so just show up, go walk in the ice houses, and the rest will just happen.
Yep.
All right. Let's thank both of our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.